A 75-year-old woman stood frozen in her son's doorway. The house was strangely quiet. She stepped inside to find a strange sight. Her son's cows had wandered loose near the entrance. He never let his cows roam free. As she walked deeper into the house, she called out to her son and grandchildren, but no one answered. Her feet dragged with each step, growing heavier as she moved through the silent rooms, and then she saw it. A dark, sticky pool of blood was seeping from beneath the bedroom door. Her son lay motionless on his bed. A gaping hole ran straight through his forehead. Beside him was her grandson, bearing the same terrible wound and the same deadly stillness. Her eyes then found the smaller bed where her 9-year-old granddaughter, laying still in the same horrific state, staring blankly at the ceiling. Her scream tore through the quiet village morning, the first sound anyone had heard from that house in days. This is the story about how a serial killer called Hammerman terrorized China for 4 years. Li Xinhai was a 34-year-old widower just trying to raise 2 children alone. His wife had died just months before, leaving him with 13-year-old young Li and 9-year-old Yang. Li made it a daily habit to visit his mother, Han Fangying, over the years. But for 2 days now, Han hadn't seen her son. Initially, she attributed his absence to grief. However, Li Xinhai wasn't one to simply vanish, not without informing her, and certainly not without arranging care for his children. That morning, she walked the familiar path to his house. And when she arrived, Li Xinhai's house was silent. She knocked, but there was no answer. She called his name. Nothing. But then, she hears his cows mooing from inside the house. There's something wrong. Li always let his cows out at first light. Beneath a loose stone by the door, the spare key lay in its usual spot. Her hands trembled as she inserted it into the lock, and what happened next would shatter everything she thought she knew about the world. Han Fangying's heart stopped as she opened the door. In the main room, cows stood restless and confused, but it was the sight beyond them that truly froze her. Through the open bedroom door, she could see still shapes beneath the covers of the beds. It looked like her son and grandchildren. She called their names, but there was no movement. As she moved closer, her son lay beside her grandson on the larger bed. Both of them had been beaten beyond recognition. There were holes in their foreheads. Perfect, round holes that could only have been made by something hard and heavy, driven with tremendous force. But it was the mud on little young Li's hands that broke her, mud under his fingernails. Her grandson had tried to run, but someone had dragged him back. Someone had finished what they started. On the smaller bed lay Yang, 9 years old. Her school uniform was gone. Her body was positioned in a way that no child ever should be, and in the center of her forehead, that same terrible hole. Han Fangying fell to her knees and screamed until the neighbors came running. Within hours, the small house was swarming with police officers. Nothing like this had ever happened in their quiet community. The police had no leads, no witnesses, no obvious motive. Days bled into weeks, and the trail grew cold. The killer had vanished without a trace, like smoke carried away by the wind. What the police didn't know at the time was that the holes in those foreheads weren't random violence, they were a signature. And somewhere out there, the monster who left this signature was already choosing his next victims. Yang Xinhai was born into poverty in 1968 in Hunan province. He was the middle child in a large family where there was never enough of anything, not food, not warmth, not love. But he was different from his siblings, quieter, more observant. He could draw anything he saw with perfect accuracy. His teachers said he was intelligent, maybe even gifted. His father thought he might escape their circumstances through education, but that hope died when Yang was 16. At that age, he was sent to another city to attend high school, where he would live with a relative. In that home, Yang was treated like a servant, forced to forage for wild vegetables while his classmates bought meal tickets. The humiliation ate him like acid. He dropped out, ran away, and sent a letter home saying he was going to find work instead. But honest work didn't pay enough, so he stole. First, an aluminum pot from a restaurant that owed him wages, then more. Each theft gets easier than the last, each success feeding something dark inside him. But the decline came fast. 2 years in a labor camp for pickpocketing. After 2 years of incarceration, he got released, resuming his life of crime almost instantly. During this time, he met and fell in love with a local girl who he was planning to get married to before getting arrested again and thrown in prison. She promised to wait for him until his release, but promises break. When Yang returned from his second prison sentence, he found his girlfriend marrying someone else. The wedding celebration was in full swing when he arrived home. He watched from the shadows as she laughed in another man's arms. That day, something within him broke, something that could never be repaired. For 4 years, Yang Xinhai was on a killing spree through rural China. He killed 67 people across 4 provinces. Entire families erased from existence while they slept. Children who never woke up. Parents who died trying to protect them. He wore socks over his shoes to mask his footprints. He studied police procedures during his prison sentences and learned how to avoid detection. He targeted the poorest families because he knew their deaths wouldn't be prioritized. Most importantly, he never struck the same place twice, never gave investigators a chance to connect the dots. Each murder was treated as an isolated crime, a local tragedy, while Yang moved like a ghost from province to province. The tools changed: hammers, knives, shovels, axes. But the signature never did. Those holes punched through foreheads with mechanical precision, his calling card carved into the skulls of children and grandparents alike, 10 separate batteries, all in service of a hunger that could never be satisfied. Killing gave him a rush unlike anything else, that he didn't care whether his victims deserved to live or die. They were just obstacles between him and the high he craved. But this killing spree was about to come to an abrupt and bitter end. November 2002, a visiting police officer noticed something familiar about a crime scene in Hunan province. The brutal efficiency, the holes in the victims' heads, the sexual violence mixed with petty theft. She'd seen this exact pattern before in her own jurisdiction. Different city, different victims, but the same sick signature. That moment of recognition changed everything. For the first time, police departments began sharing information. The scattered crimes revealed themselves as links in a chain of horror stretching across half of China. A task force formed. Profiles were built. 30,000 fingerprints were analyzed. The net began to close, slowly but surely, around Yang Xinhai. But he wasn't done. Even as police flooded the countryside with wanted posters, even as villagers formed watch groups and barricaded their homes, Yang continued killing, moved to new provinces, adapted his methods. He was smart, careful, and absolutely without conscience. For months, it seemed like he might never be caught. 8 months later, another family was found murdered 400 miles away in Anhui province. An elderly woman named Qi Zhongying and her 2 grandchildren. The same brutal efficiency. The same holes punched through their skulls. The same mix of sexual violence and senseless brutality. By August 2001, the count was rising, and yet another household was it. A family of 3 in the city of Hunan. A father and his 2 children beaten to death in their sleep. September brought 2 more victims in the same province, beaten with hammers until their skulls cracked. December saw another couple murdered in their bed, stabbed and bludgeoned before having those signature holes carved into their foreheads yet again. The killer was accelerating, growing bolder with each attack. And then, the year 2002 came, making it his bloodiest year ever. By January, 5 family members were found dead. Just weeks later, 3 more victims. By June, another family of 4 had been slaughtered. July brought 4 more deaths, with 2 victims sexually assaulted after death. The numbers climbed relentlessly. October 22nd. A father and his 6-year-old daughter were beaten with a spade while they slept. His pregnant wife escaped, but lost her unborn child from the trauma. Village after village, province after province, the death toll mounting like a nightmare that refused to end. The media began calling him the Hammerman. China was being hunted by a serial killer unlike any they'd ever seen. A man who could travel hundreds of miles between murders, who could strike at families in their sleep and disappear without a trace. His name was Yang Xinhai. On a cold day in November 2003, Yang was sleeping in a public bathroom in Cow City. Dirty, homeless, carrying nothing but a pocket knife and 500 yuan in stolen money. A maintenance worker reported him as suspicious, and patrol officers came to investigate. They almost let him go. Just another drifter in a country full of them. But something about his Hunan accent, his evasive answers, his age and appearance matched the profile they'd been carrying for months. At the station, Yang Xinhai maintained his arrogance even when confronted with DNA evidence, but the evidence was overwhelming. Blood samples, fingerprints, witness testimonies from the few who'd survived his attacks. The web of violence he'd woven across 4 provinces slowly unraveled as he confessed to crime after crime. 67 murders, 23 sexual assaults, families destroyed for pocket change, and the thrill of taking lives. When asked why he'd done it, Yang Xinhai gave the only answer that mattered. When I killed people, it sparked a desire, and this inspired me to kill more. Han Fangying never got to hold her granddaughter one last time, never got to say goodbye to the son who'd visited her every morning for 34 years. The police released the bodies after the investigation, but by then they'd been evidence for so long that the family's grief had nowhere to land. She was 75 when Yang Xinhai was finally captured. Too old to find comfort in justice, too broken to celebrate his execution. The man who destroyed her family was just a name in the newspapers. Her son and grandchildren were still gone forever. Yang Xinhai went to trial in February 2004. The proceedings lasted 2 days. He showed no remorse, expressed no regret except that he hadn't been able to commit more crimes. When asked if he wanted to appeal his death sentence, he declined. For 15 days, he could have fought for his life. Instead, he waited in his cell, eating his meals with apparent satisfaction, talking to guards about the weather. On Valentine's Day, 2004, Yang Xinhai was executed by firing squad. A quick death, more merciful than anything he'd ever given his victims. But his death couldn't undo the damage, couldn't bring back the 67 people who died for his twisted pleasure, couldn't restore the families he'd obliterated or heal the communities he'd terrorized.